Hey, it is your buddy, Peace and Harmony with you here today. Much love going out to all the beautiful empowered harmonizers. And we're zooming in and focusing in a little bit more in depth. There's really kind of a general talk and discussion about suffering in relationships, especially in relationships with people who are controlling, people who are manipulative, toxic, who engage in sort of tactics such as manipulation, brainwashing, gaslighting, smear campaign, all sorts of various sundry tactics that people find themselves subjected to either in family, love, or work relationships, really, anywhere, even in your church, and especially ones that cause suffering. When we look at really the cause of suffering, suffering is a creation of the mind. And furthermore, it is energized by the heart. So suffering is caused by the mind and thought patterns that ensue and then are accentuated by the heart, or sort of your feeling center, a very high energy etheric field that emanates from your heart. So, you've heard it said you can't follow your mind and heart at the same time or try to balance out your mind and heart. When you really look at the suffering that is caused in relationships, it is a wound to both places, both the heart, the mind, and the spiritual body, the essence of a person, and really down to the core of the I am. And really, when we look at the thought patterns, that always really relates to something that is based on a continuum of judgment, of that conscious mind that is unaware. I know what's best for you. By my standards, you are. To please me, you must be. And there's a lot of these different tactics or ways of relating to people that cause this suffering. And the suffering, when you really look at it, it is created by the mind. It is a thought form that then kind of generates into the body and then is magnified by the heart. It is accentuated and put as emotion or energy in motion. And particularly when you're in relationships with people who are narcissistic, psychopathic, controlling. They want to, sort of plot things. They want to sort of plant things. They want to create this chaos or this situation where you have to focus on them and you can't focus on what's internal. You have to focus on that egoic thought form of what they think, what they're going to do, their evaluation, their judgment, their assessment. So you see this real sort of locus of control moving from the inside where it belongs to the outside predominantly. The outside meaning thought forms that are created by and magnified by the statements and treatments of others, particularly that of mistreatment, particularly that of manipulation, particularly that of heavy-handed roles such as a narcissist or a psychopath will take. And by a role, we mean something that is very sort of rigid and needs to be maintained. So there's kind of a feeling of inauthenticity or falseness or self-abandonment that causes this suffering, this pain. And that pain is usually tied to, I am not loved, I am not lovable, I am not worthy, I'm not good enough, I'm inherently flawed, I'm ugly, I'm too tall, I'm too short, I'm too fat, I'm too skinny. There's all these thought forms that then are created as a result of these manipulative relationships in the people who are surrounded by such people. In other words, they will seek you as supply, a listening ear, someone to stroke their ego, someone to go ooh and ah at their accomplishments, their promotions, their relationships, their material possessions. In other words, there's not an authentic give and take. It's a very one-directional sort of relating where you are there to just prop up and observe them, fan their fire, fan their flames, fuff up their feathers, do whatever it is. It's always about doing them. It's an external locus of control. And that, in my viewpoint, it really creates a suffering, particularly the thought forms. And thoughts are things. So your thoughts sort of run through your mind and then are accentuated by the heart and then stored as the body, and can enhance and influence your DNA as well as your muscle memory. In other words, you develop automatic relationship patterns. When this happens, I do this. When this happens, I do that. When this happens, I go to a corner and cry. When this happens, I get on the phone. When this happens, I text. When this happens, I eat. When this happens, I yell, and, I'm trying to duke it out. So particularly, trying to regain control is oftentimes where a lot of this suffering begins. So it's in other words, it's someone who's then fighting for survival. They're really locked into a fight or flight relationship pattern and habit and B state that is perpetrated and oftentimes used intentionally, deliberately, in a calculated manner by people who are both narcissistic and psychopathic. In other words, they always want people clamoring to them for attention, to abide by their wishes, to please them, to get their approval. There's this sort of insinuation in relationships, I know what's best for you, for that person. And then the person who is the supply, the target, in other words, they, even as an adult, in their 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and beyond, don't know what's best for them. So there's this whole psychological warfare that goes on, and then this subjects people to very, very horrendous and awful treatment. There was a statement by a viewer who relayed her comments on a psychopathic mother, someone who put hair remover in her shampoo, someone who would litter cigarette butts in her bed, someone who would call the cops and insinuate all this fraudulent welfare check, and just the list goes on and on. I mean, it's just a perpetual torture where somebody, just to belay their boredom or their feeling of being older or authority or etc., they just take it out and wreak havoc in people's lives. And it's very, very important that you, especially for a lot of viewers who have encountered a lot of this, and then the suffering that ensues, the suffering that follows, and how to release the suffering. Once again, I always feel it's very much going deep and understanding the cause that has created this effect, and then how to remove all this excessive suffering from the picture. So it's important to understand that the thought forms, the thoughts that you think, are the causative factor to suffering. And thoughts are nothing more than the creation of the mind. Everything is a creation of the mind. So if you read Eckhart Tolle and a lot of the other philosophies of the world who have really tried to look at and examine human suffering and the cause, Buddhism, mindfulness, meditation, there's all sorts of studies that you can do, the Bible, the Quran, whatever, there's a lot of spiritual texts, from contemporary as well as the ancients that you can read, as well as sort of evolved thinking or the new thought movement that really does capture a lot of the truth. It's so very important for you to understand, particularly that of when we talk about psychology and relationships, particularly understanding what the ego is. And that ego is very much caught up in that world of form. It's very caught up in that world of, I need to impress you. I need to have a role. I need to have a title. I need to declare my power. I need to declare, this and this and this. It's the one that wants to impress others, to put up a facade, a mask, a role, an identity that is sort of compartmentalized into a box. That is the ego. You might hear that someone has a big ego, or that person has a very humble ego, So in other words, it's really oftentimes their personality and their thought forms. Thoughts are things. So thoughts resonate in the body. And, if you look at the work of Dr. Bruce Lipton and his study of epigenetics, thoughts and emotions can impact and change your DNA. Your perception can alter your DNA, which means how things develop and grow within the body at the core cellular level. So it's very, very important, and in my mind sort of serious, that you understand, the neuroplasticity, which means the understanding that the brain can rewire and create new perceptions, new ways of responding, not reacting, getting out of the old and into the new sort of perspective. And that's really, you have to be able to negate the ego. And you really need to understand that that ego, all those egoic thought forms that are a result of people who are highly egotistical, such as narcissists, controllers, psychopaths, those individuals who prey on others or exploit and manipulate others based on their personality types. We're not putting labels here, but if you've experienced this, you'll kind of know what we're talking about and the suffering that you have encountered as a result. So in my viewpoint, it's important to understand that these egoic individuals, which have a lot of these sort of, compartmentalized thought forms that then, through interaction with others in their world, they either subjugate or really sort of recruit others into that suffering circle, if you will. And the thought forms that ensue are, based on, you don't know what's best for you. I could leave here at any moment. You must vie for my attention all the time. You must attend to me and it doesn't go the other way. So there's all these sort of relationship rules that are then set up within these egoic relationships with people who have narcissism, lack of empathy, psychopathy, lack of conscience, lack of empathy, typified by greed, all this sort of, hurtful, pathological lying, exploitation of others, the hyper-arousal of others, whether it be in the sexual or fear or intimidation, the violation of boundaries, not allowing people to have space, being disrespectful of them and their emotions and their needs and really their wishes and fooling them. And so this creates a lot of suffering, of course. When you take a blow to your own ego, which is your own thought patterns, which is your own way that you assess and judge yourself, especially based on the mirroring of others, it becomes a certain point when that ego is so wounded, it can be very severely wounded to the point that your life becomes dysfunctional, unhappiness is plaguing you, suffering, relationship problems, health problems, financial problems, all those woes. So really to look at the suffering is to understand, once again, it's those thought forms that are as a component, the thought forms that ensue as a byproduct of the relationship that are oftentimes that are, within you that you are not aware of, that are largely unconscious, that are largely running how you feel, what you do, your choices, how you spend your time, how you spend your focus, how you feel, and eventually the life that you lead and the life, that is becoming of you, and then who you become, and then what you experience and encounter. And the problem is that we have a limited amount of time in this physical body. Life oftentimes doesn't get easier or rosier. It can become more difficult, especially if you're with and surrounded by this sort of ego propping up of stakes in your life. It becomes a lot to balance, to juggle, and it takes a lot of energy that becomes wrapped up or entrapped in this, and then also those thought forms which are constantly just trying to survive and be at peace, be at contentment, and just be and exist. So it's very important that I feel to emerge and sort of release that suffering is to release those thought forms and become more aware. And the suffering is really, to do that, you need to get in a state of awareness. When these thought forms, and then how it makes you feel. In other words, everything that your ego is trying to process as an end result or byproduct from the relationship. And sometimes you need somebody, such as we do here on the channel, to help you articulate it, identify it, and then let it go. To give you perspective, to give you a sense of validity in what and to register within yourself what happiness feels like, what happiness looks like, what letting go of the fight or flight mechanism that sort of limbic, very, sort of automatic process, which is created when you're in a sort of stress or a fear or intimidating relationship, specifically while you're being controlled and living, inauthentically. Eventually your awareness is going to bubble through. This is, either by things that you see, things that you do. I can't believe I did that. Look at that Taylor Swift song, Look What You Made Me Do, or whatever she keeps saying like 1,000 times. So it's very important to understand that relationships can then pull out the worst of you. And it's important to understand that, especially when you get into the psychopathy, there's this really sort of, for lack of a better word, just sort of this control or manipulation or telepathic control, where they really make people do things that aren't naturally themselves. In other words, people who all of a sudden start smoking, they, in other words, the psychopathic energy, the will is so strong as an antithesis to them that they can no longer hold a job. They can't stay in their office. They start drinking, they start smoking, they feel this compulsion to do things that they have never done before. And so oftentimes this is really what I feel from this level of individual is there's sort of an energy that emanates, or as a psychopath might say, just oozes out of them, and really has the ability to sort of push people to do things and see things and perceive things that aren't really their own or in their best interest. So in other words, the pressure is so very intense, the mind control is so very intense, that it sort of flips around one's perspective, one's view on things, how things look and are interpreted. And so it also has the ability to sort of move that which I guess the very important thing and the very serious thing is that it can cause people to do things that are really, they become out of control. And they perceive things that are in the realm of that hyper arousal, that hypersexualization of everything, this sort of, I'm going to live, or I'm, this life or death sort of like addiction that grabs hold of people when they're in these relationships that cause a lot of suffering. So it's very important, I think, for you to understand that suffering is caused oftentimes by the thoughts. Suffering is caused by the thoughts. So if you can let that go and stop those thoughts from continuing to cycle and becoming then the awareness that observes these thoughts, can release just a whole avalanche of like emotional glacier, around you that has caused you to feel stifled, petrified, just begin to identify and release all those thoughts that have been created, because it's nothing more than a creation of your mind. It's within you. This is running within you and you have the control. So I really think that that is super important for you to, when we talk about like living in the now, or Eckhart Tolle, talks about that, is coming to that a presence where you're not always evaluating and judging from the past or the future. You're just allowing it to be in that awareness. And then you can practice this awareness just through conscious, directed attention, mindfulness meditation, keeping yourself in check. But I think that once you really kind of understand that process, it'll help you to release a lot of the suffering that has been, hurting you and inhibiting you and blocking you in your life, especially as an aftermath of these types of relationships. This is your buddy, Peace and Harmony, with you here today, and I hope that these videos do help. Please share and please subscribe for more great tools, videos, discussion, and support.